Joey asked the question, why is this debate worth tuning into? Now, in the past, vice presidential debates have generally been not great.
They don't move the needle a lot.
Benson Quayle, I know Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy, and you, sir, know Jack Kennedy, right? I mean, that's really the big one when we think of monumental moments in vice presidential debates.
But you're picking one out of dozens.
And let's also remember Benson lost that election. So how much did that work out for him? I don't.
Not.
Yeah, not so much. So why are we going to watch this one tonight? And I was very interested to hear what Steve Roberts, our ABC News political analyst, had to say, because I thought he had some really interesting insight, and I picked a few things up. I'm curious about what you garnered from that and why you think this is a big one for us to watch.
The big one for me is what he led off with, just that the race is so close. Yeah. And in particular in the swing states, a couple thousand or maybe even 100 votes, one way or the other, could be a huge deal and could decide this race. So that's a big one. I liked what he said at the end as well about trust. It comes down to trust. And both these guys are the number two behind Trump and Harris. But I'll be watching for what Steve mentioned right there of trust. Hey, which one of these two do I come away from and feel like steady your hand? I trust that guy more if they were in office and if they had to leave.
Do you think that the trust issue, your proclivity to trust, tends to fall back on your prejudice for your ideology? In other words, let me stop using big words.
You're throwing a lot of them out there.
So in other words,
trust.
If I am a right-leaning independent, I go, Harris is a Democrat from California. And while I know Trump lies constantly, he is a fire hose of misinformation. Harris said some things in her 2020 race that I didn't really like, and now she's saying something different. I don't know that I trust her. I'll go with the devil I know versus the devil I don't know. In other words, I trust that I know Trump is lying to me about a number of crazy things, right? He's not going to bring about the purge, okay? Which is what people are talking about after his speech this weekend.
And I think Harris does it in a more pleasant, smiley fashion, less bombastic.
Certainly, but if I tend to be somebody who's a little prejudiced toward a right-leaning ideology, I'm going to go, I don't trust her.
No.
She's trying to win my vote.
Right.
Whereas Trump, I know I don't trust. Whereas somebody who's on the left goes, how could you ever trust Trump? He would never do that. And you go, well, wait a minute. What about Harris and my favorite TV commercial, which is Harris wants to give illegal immigrants in prison sex change operations paid for with taxpayer dollars. That's my favorite commercial.
She's for they, them. He's for you.
It's so over the top. It's great. But if I'm left-leaning, I go, Trump is that fire hose of misinformation.
And they're cherry-picking one instance of one clip she said one time.
And sure, she might have flip-flopped on that, but I trust her more. Do you really trust her more? Do you trust him more? Or do you you're more skeptical of the person who's on the other side of the ideological aisle?
I'm going to dance around your question and say this. It's not about Trump or Harris tonight. It's about these two guys who haven't had the spotlight, and I want to just, between them, see which one I trust more. Because I don't know either one of these two very well because the spotlight has been so bright on Trump, and we know what Trump is all about, and we have a good sense now, or at least a better sense, from Harris through her campaigning of what she is. Lots of people out there still say, well, she hasn't done interviews. We really don't know what she's about. There's enough of a track record. I'm comfortable. I have a fairly good idea of what she is and isn't about.
I'm going to tell you why you're dead wrong. It's always about Trump and Harris. So while we say it's not about them tonight, it's always about them.
It comes back to them, but with these guys on the stage.
Quit agreeing with my opposition to your point. It's absolutely about Trump and Harris, and what will happen is Vance is going to be all about how bad Harris is. Walz is going to be all about how bad Trump is. The focus of tonight's answers will always be the top of the ticket on the other side.
If Vance can do that, that will be a win for Vance.
Let me tell you, on paper, this looks like a blowout. Consider this. Vance, Marine veteran, right? The guy grew up, humble beginnings, American dream, wrote a best-selling book, went to Yale Law School. That's where Supreme Court justices go, Yale Law. He graduates Yale Law, and he ends up in politics, and he starts climbing the ladder in politics. Whereas Walz went to a college you hadn't even heard of before, and then he got a master's degree in education. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but his pedigree is not for political success. His education degree from Minnesota State University, Mankato, on paper, if I were to say which one of these is going to be the president of the United States, the Yale grad who was the Marine vet or the National Guard Reserve with a master's in education, which one is the political?
Vance.
It's Vance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is where I think Steve Roberts said something really interesting. He said, issues change, character and judgment don't change. And to your point about what we're trying to garner from them, which one do I trust?
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really interesting because that's
Who's
ultimately
more
what we're doing.
relatable to you, not the Yale law guy.
We're all talking about character, which also is really interesting because when he was in the Marines, he was a journalist in the Marines. Then he became a best-selling New York Times author, and he has a degree from Yale Law. If I were to say, Joe, a guy who served in the military as a journalist, wrote a best-selling New York Times book, and has a degree from Yale Law.
Certainly more polished.
Are they a Democrat or a Republican? You would probably say, that's probably a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You lean that way.
Well, because Republicans tend to tell us that Ivy Leaguers are elitists, that New York Times best-selling authors are,
Bush
unapproachable.
was an Ivy Leaguer, though, too.
So's Ted Cruz, but that's not the message that we get.
Right.
Rick Santorum was while he was telling everybody else how worthless education is. Right? So all of these different things, and you go, well, it's a bit of a curveball that they threw with J.D. Vance. Meanwhile, Walz, who is now granted, he was an educator, probably part of the teachers union, right? But Midwest, middle-aged white guy, down-home values, probably Sunday dinners with the family, going to church. We'd think that's more conservative. Mm-hmm. We really have a stereotypical flip-flop going on as far as these candidates and the parties that they adhere to.
Yes, no doubt about that. And how will that all play out? Because I don't think that the American public, they want to be able to relate to Tim Walz, but they still want to look up to him. You want to be able to look up to your vice president. You don't want to sit there and go, oh, yeah, he's just like me. In fact, I might be a little better than that guy.
That's true.
I think both of these two have challenges tonight. Vance has to make sure that he can defend Trump positions and he doesn't get tied up in this game of, well, Trump thinks this. I don't exactly agree with that. And I think he's going to be on defense most of the night.
Yeah.
If he can be on offense and can make it about Harris and her evil leftist agenda, he's in great shape.
I think he needs to come off as more human, and Walz needs to come off as more prepared. That's what I'm looking for tonight.
Thanks for watching The Chris and Joe Show. Click to see more from Chris and Joe, and tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.